So there's this joke going around the queerer parts of the internet. Sometimes it comes on an image of a unicorn with a skull head. It says, "We canceled Pride, get ready for Gay Wrath Month." That might not sound funny to you, but let me give you a little bit of context. A history lesson, as we so often do. In a speech titled "The Other America," given on March 14th, 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, "In the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. And so, in a real sense, our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. And as long as America postpones justice, we stand in a position of having these reoccurrences of violence and riots over and over again. As long as America postpones justice, we stand in the position of having these reoccurrences of violence and riots over and over again. Dr. King gave this speech, as I said, on March 14th, 1968. On April 4th, 1968, Dr. King was assassinated. After Dr. King's assassinations, the country erupted in protest. In 110 cities around the United States, there were riots and protests for days and days and days. Riots in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Illinois, Baltimore, Maryland, Kansas City, Detroit, Michigan, New York City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Cincinnati, Ohio, Trenton, New Jersey, Wilmington, Delaware, Louisville, Kentucky, and elsewhere, created political pressure which led to the rapid passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which, though imperfect, includes the Fair Housing Act, which addresses some of the key issues of housing discrimination, which had been the focus of Dr. King's work from 1966 and onward. Later, in 1969, after decades of consistent raids on gay bars, which were the only social spaces available to LGBT people for years, the only spaces where you could avoid arrest for simply holding your partner's hand or wearing the clothes which felt most appropriate to you. After decades of this, there was an early morning raid on the Stonewall Inn on June 28th, 1969. Now, the Stonewall Inn, like many gay bars of the time, especially in New York City, was owned by the mafia. And usually the mafia was clued in on raids before they happened. So a lot of the time, even just a few days earlier, raids on the Stonewall would end in little to nothing because everybody knew before it started. But this time there was no warning. The police stormed in, confiscated the bar's alcohol, and arrested 13 people, including employees and people they found in violation of the state's gender-appropriate clothing statute, a thing they discerned by taking people dressed as women into bathrooms and forcing them to show them their genitals. Fed up with the consistent police harassment and social discrimination, angry patrons and residents of the neighborhood hung around outside of the bar rather than dispersing, becoming increasingly agitated as events unfolded and people were aggressively manhandled by the police. At one point, in the process of arresting drag king and mother of the New York City gay scene, Stormy DeLarvery, a person of indeterminate gender identity who was then understood as a butch lesbian, a police officer hit Stormy in the head while forcing them into a police van. And while this is happening, Stormy shouts to the onlookers to act, which incites the crowd to begin to throw pennies, bottles, cobblestones, and whatever else they could get their hands on at the police. We don't really know who threw the first brick, though Martha Johnson is a good guess. But within moments, this went from a police raid and some agitation to a riot involving over 100 people. Though that riot was dispersed that night, protests continued and flared up across New York City over the next week. In the wake of these protests, a galvanized LGBT, at the time just gay, movement grew in size and strength, dramatically changing the political landscape. 1 year later, in June of 1970, thousands of people marched from the Stonewall Inn to Central Park in what was then known as the Columbus Street Liberation Pride Parade and is now known simply as Pride. Pride was a riot. Riots got us the 1968 Civil Rights Act. Over and over in the history of the United States and the world, riots serve as an unfortunate moment of breaking when repeated asks for justice and repeated incidents of injustice overwhelm people until they cannot do anything but scream. When we do it right, riots lead to more and more change. They become a spark that lights a fire that can keep going. The moment of that spark, the moment when we go from tinderbox to flame, can be really, really scary. It is intense. It is violent. It is not what we would wish our society to be like. But it can be something that pushes us to a more just, more sustainable, more loving world. In a letter written and circulated among UU clergy this week, we wrote that our ancient and evolving theology calls us to bring an end to all hells that exist. Let me say that again. As Unitarian Universalists, our ancient and evolving theology calls us to bring an end to all hells that exist. This is complicated work. This is long-term work. When we consider our Time for All Ages story, this is work that is both the immediate rushing in to stop injustice and the tending of flames and the stitching of garments and the digging of wells. We bring an end to all hells that exist by bringing our own best capabilities to bear on injustice. Andy I of the New York City chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, a progressive public interest association of lawyers, law students, paralegals, jailhouse lawyers, law collective members, and other activist legal workers, which provides, among other things, protest trainings and legal observations, said on Facebook just this morning, a lot of protest culture valorizes risking arrest, as if it is the pinnacle of commitment to the fight. And it's true that sometimes what is called for is a willingness to put one's body on the line. But I think it's also tied up in the way that our culture trains us to be very excited about short-term crisis response and much less excited about the less newsworthy, long-term slog and behind-the-scenes work. I always encourage people when they're trying to be strategic about their participation to try to disentangle where can the energy and skills and privileges that I have be most effectively applied from the legitimate need to express the feelings of urgency that come from such a high stakes situation. The message I bring you, my people, this morning is that each of you have skills that we need right now, right this very second. Those skills don't have to be skills that take you to a protest at all. Though I might suggest some of the daytime protests have been very level and easy to be at. There is a daily protest in my neighborhood in North Hollywood that starts at 12:30 in the afternoon every single day. They hang out by the library. They have signs. You can drive by and honk your horn. We did that the other day. You can go and stand with them. You can get to learn a few things. But you don't have to go to a thing to do something that matters. There's a lot of other things. If you read my email last week titled What You Can Do, you saw some of those things. You can give to bail funds, which helps people who are getting arrested at protests get out. You can write letters and call and email the officials who you elect. You can let people know that the mayor of Los Angeles is currently not accepting emails. You can keep doing some of what we're doing. Howard forwarded an email from Essentia just yesterday, which mentions Essentia's commitment to undoing systemic racism as part of the commitment to caring for people experiencing homelessness. You can dig in and find what you are able to do. Maybe what you're able to do is limited. Maybe what you can do is buy a Black Lives Matter sign and put it in your yard. That's something. One of the things I've been doing is keeping a running post on my Facebook of Black folks who might want a sandwich, which then allows for anybody to come in and send $10 to someone. And it's a little thing, but if you can imagine in this moment when particularly Black folks and everybody are overwhelmed by what is happening in the world, having someone say, here's $10 to buy lunch, changes things a lot. You can do little things and they matter. The thing that matters most is not getting arrested or being seen at a protest. Honestly, I don't care if anyone ever sees you doing justice. I care if you do it. I care if you live every day in a way that changes and challenges the assumptions that have been taught to all of us from birth. The assumptions that say that some people are better than other people, the assumptions that say that the laws of our country are just. I challenge you to read things that you maybe don't think you agree with, to learn more about prison and police abolition, to read and dig into the complicated and sometimes scary seeming proposals being put forward by Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives. I urge you to support our Black Unitarian Universalists by giving to or promoting the voice of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, or BLUE. I encourage you to come to me with questions. I don't have all the answers, but I've been thinking about this real hard for a real long time, and I'm happy to be a resource. Beloveds, we are called to end all hells that exist. We are called to build what heaven we will get here and now. Whatever else is true, I believe in our capacity to do this. I am thankful for the work that you are already doing, the partnership with Essentia, the Black Lives Matter sign, which can now be found on the outside of our building, the commitment to replace that sign when somebody steals it. Beloveds, don't let the fear of the moment scare you off. Don't let the pressure to do everything keep you from doing anything. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good or done. Love harder. Do the things that you can. And that way, piece by piece, we will build a sustainable, better world. Amen. Blessed be. I invite you now to join in our closing hymn, How Could Anyone, as performed by Elizabeth Curtin.